Nie benadeus nie, dis prins. Daai een wat oplos.
So, audio rolling, camera 1 rolling, camera 2 rolling. Wil jy my chappie insluk? Alright, wait. Okay, jy het nie 'n probleem met dit nie. Okay. Mama. Okay, and video 4, worldview, behavior.
Welcome to session 4. And in this session, we're just going to talk a little bit more about this worldview that at the end of the day creates our behavior. So just to summarize again quickly, just to recap almost in a way, is that on the first session, we spoke briefly about this world that we live in, this disruptive change that we are experiencing. In the second video, we gave you a link to a video on YouTube that you can go and watch about this new generation that's birthed and how this generation is stepping into the space and everyone kind of just, wow, what's happening around here. And then in the previous session, we talked about just who are these generations and how do we look at these different generations, and that we should be very careful that we don't categorize and rather see where are the similarities and the uniquenesses, acknowledging them, but how do we work together from this space. In this session, we want to talk a little bit more about this behavior, because at the end of the day, a generation is defined by its behavior. And that's why we said in the previous session, don't look at a generation just based on age. Often we look at an older person, we like, that's a boomer, you know, or we look at someone mid-age and we kind of, I think that's an Xer, or a young person coming in, we're like, that's a Gen Z.
There's a new one called the Yold.
The Yold.
The young old, they just turned 65, so they say it's a decade of the Yold now.
The decade of the Yold. So you see, again, there's another generation out there. And so what we want to talk about in this session is really help to understand that at the end of the day, a generation is defined by its behavior. And that's why we will see someone that's maybe in his late 40s, that by age, they are defined as an Xer, but by their behavior, they're very millennial. Or you have someone that's in their late 20s, early 30s, that by age they are a millennial, but they behave very similar to a boomer. And therefore we don't want to categorize, but we want to look at these behavior. What defines a behavior? And you will see on the video now is that we have this diagram that we say at the end of the day, behavior is defined by your values. The way you live, the things that's real for you. But that values are, underneath all of those values, there's something called your belief system that helps you to develop your values. But your belief system is again defined by your worldview. And we want to talk a little bit about this worldview. What is this worldview? What is it that we are experiencing? And if we look at this new generation, the Xers that are coming in, and trying to understand this generation, but also try to understand every generation, is we need to look at the worldview. And when is that worldview shaped, and how is that worldview shaped? So I want to talk a little bit about the worldview. And what do we see when it comes to this worldview that is out there, these experiences that this generation is coming through. And maybe to guide us in our conversation, when you study generations or you study worldview, there's a lot of things that you can look at. And as this diagram will show you, there's 4 things that we look into. We first of all look at the role that technology plays. I think technology, as we've mentioned in the previous sessions, technology really plays a role in influencing who you are, the way you use technology, the way you understand technology. And you've mentioned in the previous session, you know, Gen Xers, there was a time for them without a cell phone and with a cell phone. If we talk about the millennials, is they don't know a time without a cell phone. And when you talk to Gen Zs, there's like I don't know a phone where I can't look at the person that I'm talking to. I can't have a life without a cell phone. So the role of technology, but we also talk about relationships, family, understanding what does family mean. And then thirdly, we talk about education. How does education play a role? And then big events.
For me, that it helps to understand before we even get to worldview.
Yeah.
All the research I've done and seen is context and exposure. Mm-hmm. And all 4 that's giving context, and that dictates exposure. So, and that goes into worldview, and belief system and then values and virtues behavior.
Yeah, so when we look at, let's take for example the current environment that we find ourselves in, and we look at the millennials that are now in what we often refer to as in their formative years. Now, maybe just to add this in helping you to understand, is that the people that really study these things a lot, they kind of define that the first 20, 22 years of your life is where the majority of your worldview is developed. But then the older you get, the more difficult it becomes to change your worldview. And that's because of all these foundational blocks that are laid down. But then in this first 20, 22 years of your life, they've also broken it down into two areas. The first 9 to 10 years is around your foundational years, foundational blocks that are laid down, and then from there on you start coming into your formative years, as into now I'm building on these little blocks that have been laid down. Now it doesn't mean you can't change your worldview or you can't change your behavior. It is just as you get older, the more difficult it becomes to change. And I think that's an important part also, that when we look between younger and older, that older needs to understand, because these younger guys are in the early stages, things can change for them very quickly.
What I hear is, so you've got these two segments. So
Yeah.
what I understand from science is your IQ is formed up until 7. So that first 9 to 10 years, that's IQ.
That's your foundational stages,
And everything after that's EQ. And science says there's nothing you can do about your IQ. That's set. But EQ can change. That's malleable. That's formative.
Yeah.
So, and everything we need for this fourth industrial revolution and this VUCA world we're moving towards is EQ. So that's actually good news that you're telling us it's possible to change that. It's difficult, but it's possible.
But then there's an intentional side, as we are talking about EQ and IQ, is the IQ that we've mentioned in the second session, or in the first session, about my adaptability. Am I open for this change that is taking place, and do I step in line with it, and move with that? So there are all these elements that are happening around us. But as I said, let's just talk a little bit maybe about what we are experiencing in the now, as in with regards to technology. You referred early on to the cell phones, but how technology plays a role in helping to define who this current generation is. So
what comes to mind is what we spoke about earlier around resilience. I mean, there's a world of change. We don't have a choice. Change is coming. You either adapt or die, basically.
It's kind of what we heard when we were stepping into the workplace. We do it this way, adapt or get out of it.
But we have to go with the flow of it. Many of us were raised with certain values, religion, culture, routines, and a worldview based on, like you say, our parenting, relationships, and what we were exposed to. But I think what's really coming through with the younger generations is that they are exposed to so much more. So I find myself as a parent trying to instill a value in my child, and explaining to them the concept of gratitude. Be grateful for what you have. There are people out there that don't have food, eat your food, kind of thing. But they've learned that value because they've watched YouTube clips, and they've exposed themselves to a whole world that is conditioning their worldview, that's separate from my worldview. So I'm no longer the single source, neither is the school teacher or our community the one that's influencing a worldview. They're exposed to a whole global worldview. So
it is the world influencing the worldview.
Yeah, and there's almost like a global culture that is exposed. I mean, you can speak to any kid that's between the age of 8 and 12 what they want to be one day, and they'll all tell you they want to be a YouTuber because they know they make a lot of money. And they talk a lot. And when they're playing their Fortnite or their Minecraft, they are giving comments about how the game is going, and as if they are YouTubing. I mean, that's conditioned the whole world around how they see. And my son, for instance, will say, I'm a nerd, and I'm happy because I research every day everything that I love. At the moment, it's Star Wars, so research everything about Star Wars. He can tell me everything. Anything that a Gen Xer who actually watched the first Star Wars wouldn't know.
Yeah.
Because they're so exposed to all this information.
Now, just what he said, there's a generational thing that just kicked in here. You said your son says he's a nerd, and I think as a Gen Xer, when I grew up like him, nerds, no, those are the guys out there. You don't mix with them. You know? And here someone comes
He's so
proudly out, I'm a
proud.
nerd. I'm like him, no, you can't do that.
He loves being a nerd.
That's amazing. While I'm listening to you, I'm thinking maybe it's not the presence of technology and education and relationship, but
you have people that are in an environment where they also don't have textbooks, but because they never received it. They just don't have access to textbooks, and they experience education coming from someone teaching them. So they need to sit and listen and learn as someone is sharing the information. And that's a behavioral thing that eventually that we will find in the workspace where someone from that environment walks in and say, well, yes, we all talk about personal development, but when is someone coming to me and they share the information with me, and someone else is saying, I'm walking into the work environment and I just need access to technology and I will find the information and I will learn through that. And that's how we need to understand these different generations, but also worldview, these experiences that people are experiencing.
so if relationships is one of the key defining factors in forming my worldview, if there's a fatherless generation out there, absence of these relationships, that's going to be a major factor.
Yeah.
So it's
And fatherless is not just the gender father, it's mentoring.
yes, the leadership,
The leadership,
guidance.
the guidance, and everything that goes with it. Yeah, that there's, if I don't have that, or, well, those who do have access to that, obviously will experience education and understanding of relationship in a total different way than someone who doesn't have it. And as understanding that in our work context. So to summarize this, and to summarize the session almost in a way, is to say that yes, at the end of the day, generations are defined by their behavior. And to understand a generation, we need to go all the way down and understand the worldview that they've been exposed to and the experiences that they've gone through. And as we've given just 4 guidelines: technology, education, relationships, and major events. If we understand a little bit about that in every generation, we will have a better understanding to why every generation is behaving in a certain way. And so we hope this was helpful in helping to understand just how a generation is eventually then defined and almost in a way, as we can say, created. Welcome back. This is session 5 on generational leadership. How do I create a healthy intergenerational work environment? Now, in the first 4 sessions, we spoke about a lot of things. We spoke a little bit about this disruptive world we are in. We spoke about this new generation that is birthed. We've got a bit of understanding as into who these different generations are. And in the previous session, we touched base on, what defines a generation, the worldview that eventually shapes your behavior. Now, I want to take this almost to a next level now and saying, let's bring this into our work environment with all of that kind of in the background that helps to shape this worldview that we are now in, and saying, okay, how do I bring all of this into my workspace? I want to share a short story, and Tarshish and myself had the privilege a couple of years ago to travel through Southern Africa on a research when we did our master's degrees, and we interviewed hundreds of people. We interviewed business leaders, government leaders, community leaders, educational leaders, and government leaders. And so much information came to us.
Yeah, we did the government leaders twice.
Oh, we had to do them twice. Religious leaders. I apologize for that one, but
Some places they are the same, unfortunately.
so we interviewed these different leaders, and what really stood out for us at the end of the day was that there's a lot about strategy that is out there and how strategic you need to be as an organization or a company. But at the end, it all boils down to the culture of the company or the culture of the organization. Maybe, Tarshish, you share a little bit about your understanding or your experience from this importance of culture. It's like culture is always there. It's not like it's not there, whether you're intentional or not intentional.
I'm all for strategy. I mean, I love strategy. Comes down to three things actually. One is a diagnosis of the problem. The second one is a guiding policy, and the third one is coherent action. So I'm all
What
for
do I
strategy.
do?
Yeah, but it's almost having all the ingredients for a nice something to eat, but you don't have heat. Now that heat is culture. Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And to put that into context is, if I don't have a healthy cohesion and emotional stability, adaptability and resilience, a symbiotic relationship in the company, then we can go on meetings and strategic sessions. It's going to be a waste of time, energy, money. So we have to understand that culture is important. Now, is culture important? Yes and no. If you're all about the money and just success,
that's your culture.
That's your culture, and it's toxic. I just read through an article about a company called Sasol, about what happened with their toxic culture. I can tell you about Uber and that toxic leadership culture. The word culture means to care, and that is created by trust and shared values. What do we really care about? And do we trust each other that all of us care about the same values? If we have that prevalent in our organization or as a family, individuals, then we're intentional about culture. And that culture helps the strategy to go much further in being significant organizations that makes a change. And everything points towards this new generation being birthed. Just look at the American, we're now in the American, the caucuses for the American elections. Bernie Sanders is doing very well. Why? Because there's a generation that says we think socially. Now, it doesn't matter where you are on the spectrum of politics. The fact is, this new generation is socially more aware. Culture says, healthy culture, intentional culture says, how can we be aware of one another in business, in economics, in education, in developing as in your fourth dimension, your fourth perspective is moving together forward.
And I think a key word that he used there is intentionality.
Yes.
Because culture develops either way, whether you're intentional or not. It is whether you're happy with that culture and that culture is currently within your work environment. It's about how am I intentional to create a work environment that's inclusive of everybody. Otherwise, it could be a culture that is just one-way driven, specific goals that are set out by leadership and the rest just needs to follow. And then we start asking questions, why are the people leaving? Why do I have a retention rate that is so low and people are only sticking for 10 months, 12 months, 1.5 years and then they leave? Is it because that culture is not inclusive or is it because they just don't belong here? From your research, the intentionality of culture and how you need to be intentional in creating a very specific kind of a culture that's inclusive. What are some of your findings?
So, I mean, my focus was more on the preferred leadership styles different generations prefer in a workplace, especially in the emerging markets and with the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So my research really focused on what we share as preferences. So I used the leadership styles of Daniel Goldman, the emotional leadership styles. He has 6. And what has come through quite consistently across all of the generations, particularly in Gen X and millennials, is the 4 resonance styles that come back to that very same thing that we've been saying from the beginning, is that what makes us human, what makes us relate to each other. So there's an element of affiliation and belonging, the affiliative style, that you recognize me as a human being and I can contribute.
So sorry, you talk about the affiliative style of leadership.
Leadership.
Okay.
Then there's the coaching style. So I need my leaders to teach me. I need my leaders to develop me. I want to grow. So there's that need to grow and to go further. There is the democratic piece where they want leaders to involve them in decision making. I want to be part of the vision that you're taking me to, which is the fourth resonance style of visionary leadership. And I mean, that all speaks to many models and theories around the world, around needs and basic human behavior and culture, and bringing all these pieces of people together to achieve a greater good. And it comes down to that shared values, shared beliefs, shared goals, the element of humanity, you know.
What I like about your leadership styles, that you came to the conclusion of these 4 leadership styles. If I think back to our research that we've done, and we identified obviously a number of cultures that's more inclusive, but at the end of the day, we came down to 4 key cultural values that's required to be inclusive, irrespective of your generation. And I remember in our research, when we worked through all this desk information that we've gathered and the field experience, we try to identify, where does all of this fit into that's inclusive of all these different generations. Every generation expresses a need for that. And your 4 leadership styles touch base on each of these 4 areas, because what we came from our research is there's a need for a culture of personal development, the need of personal growth, whether it's coaching or creating the space so that I can learn. We spoke about it in the previous session. Is it someone teaching me and I'm receiving the information, or I use technology to gain the information? But there's a space, there's a culture towards personal development as a value for the organization. The second one is a culture of change. Are we open to change, but also how do I participate in the change? Am I being included into the decision making, which links up to the culture of engagement? Of it is not just top leadership that are making the decisions and everyone needs to execute and go and make it happen, but it's people are being included in those decision making processes that are taking place, but also with the execution of that. It's a mutual thing that are taking place. And then the 4th cultural value is the culture of community, the sense of belonging. I am part of something much bigger. And I know, Tarish, you love talking about an MTP, which is almost key to this entire culture of community.
Sorry, what does MTP stand for?
Well, in the old days, we used to talk about a vision. Simon Sinek says why, or some people will call it a noble goal. I just talk about a massive transformative purpose. But maybe if we can look at it through a lens of push and pull. Like in the previous session, we talked about absence and presence.
Yes.
Absence of relationships and technology, and the presence of technology and certain relationships. If you like reading, Margaret Wheatley on New Sciences and Leadership, it's a good book. We come out of a 300-year push perspective of Newtonian physics that really influenced our leadership styles. And that's why your leadership styles you're talking about is more a pull. So people have to pull. They are pulled now into being inspired by, being collaborative leadership, which is more closer to a quantum leadership style, quantum science, explaining the leadership styles. So massive transformative purpose, if you look at that again, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky's research, when there's this unattainable, massive transformative purpose, it pulls me, it inspires me. I want to be a part of this. I will give my life for this. Where in the previous dispensation, you had this top-down Newtonian, we even called organizations well-oiled machines, as if people were numbers and gears, which we know is not the case. And algorithms and artificial intelligence is reminding us now even faster that we are not machines. We are this dynamic beings. And for that, we need new models. And that's why cultures of new leadership styles and organizational cultures is important in inspiring people to have autonomy, to have purpose, and to have meaning within my workplace. So that's why a massive transformative purpose is much more effective in attracting new generation people.
To be
because
part of.
there's actually 2 things that if you look at a lot of the big Fortune 500 companies, they use a massive transformative purpose, or there's a way, a channel for me to be developed and equipped. So if you have those 2 things in your company, you will attract Gen Zs because they want to be developed and they want to be part of something that will change the world.
But it's not exclusive to just the next generation. I think they...
Yeah, well you'll have a silent generation, a boomer that's still influenced by the Newtonian way of thinking. Now we have a responsibility, and it's all about, yes, that's still there. There will always be a remnant of that. But a lot of them are picking up in the second half of their life, thinking of new ways of new careers actually. Now suddenly thinking more Gen Z. And that's why I like what you're saying. You know, you can get a boomer thinking like a Gen Z because the exposure now, remember it shifts. It's a dance on the spectrum.
It's that fourth dimension of you realizing where it's moving
and
towards.
me adapting, and now yes, I can have a different paradigm because there's a paradigm shift.
So perhaps on that, just going back to my research. So Goldman has six leadership styles. 2 of them are dissonant, which has a negative influence and can create a toxic work environment. The other 4 are resonant, which are the ones that I mentioned that link to your 4 values that you bring into culture. And those 2 dissonant styles are coercive and pace setting, which is that micromanage pushing style that is quite prevalent in some boomers and older generations. And they do result in a more negative work culture.
But not that we want to talk just about leadership styles here. Obviously, depending on the situation, those 2 leadership styles can still play a role.
In a crisis, short term, but over the long term, if you're constantly micromanaging and commanding people to do work, without bringing in the resonant styles of trust, of belonging, of shared purpose, of community, of a sense of belonging and growing and developing, it becomes toxic. So you have to use them in combination and in very short succession.
What I've seen is when you work with production, you know, you have to make 1 million cell phones, then a certain leadership style is necessary because you have to have the same product being delivered at the same standard and quality in a certain time. So the push model works better, and then the incentives, the best incentive is enough production, you'll get a production bonus. But when you work with smart creatives, you have to work with a pool. So I'm not going to give you something when you finish this design or this video production, whatever the case, but afterwards I will recognize you, maybe with a pizza or a party. And that's more inspirational than the production bonus. It's counterproductive and counterintuitive.
It sounds so millennial, you're getting your medal for everything you've done.
But what I like what Justine says, so you read the context and you understand, because of the knowledge, how to use which model in which situation.
So again, just to summarize, so what we take from that is, from your research on a leadership style perspective, as into what's needed as we move into this 4th area, or this 4th industrial revolution, your leadership styles, and from our research that we've taken and identified, you know, what cultural environments are needed. I'm excited how these 4 things, or actually 8 things, come together and form these 4 key elements and complementing one another. So in the next few sessions, or in the next 4 sessions, we're gonna explore a little bit about each of these 4 cultural values: a culture of personal development, a culture of change, a culture of engagement, and a culture of community. And it's on that basis that Generation Index has based its foundation and its research on, in saying, so how do we help to create an intergenerational work environment? And we identify these 4 cultural values as being key in creating that space.